And Karen Carlisle, again, has written many books, but she has a workshop today, don't you, Karen? Having a talk at 1 p.m. in the workshop room called A Foot in Both Worlds. Sounds fascinating.
Hi, everyone. I'm Karen J Carlisle, author of Victorian Mysteries, Steampunk Fantasy and Cozies with the Twist, and someone said, what's Cozies? That's in Cozy Mysteries. Today I'm discussing 3 of my books, which I've got a few, A Fatale, The Illusioneer, and my latest, Mrs. Hudson Investigates, which is an ebook. And I've got to remember to do these slides myself. So today it's called A Foot in Both Worlds, and you've got to follow me on this very winding journey as I discuss the theme, this year's event theme, which is Carnival. We're talking about the psyche of the Victorian era, a collision of supernatural science and a few steampunk adjacent things along the way. Okay, so Mrs. Hudson Investigates, that's what I'll talk about first, was published last month. I had thought for a second there, I think. Last month as an ebook, and you've probably noticed there's this bit of a deluge of Sherlock Holmes books at the moment. It's because most of the Sherlock Holmes stories, except for about 2, are now in public domain. So you'll find there's a few anthologies that are coming out. Last year, Mrs. Hudson was actually in a Where's Holmes anthology, which basically is stories with all secondary characters because Holmes isn't actually there. And that's why you're seeing a few of those, and that's why you've seen stuff on Netflix and things like that. Okay, so Mrs. Hudson Investigates is based in the Holmesian world of Sherlock Holmes, and it's supposed to have a blurb. Oh, the blurb's on that one. Sorry, I redid the slides last night. So we all know the stories: mystery, a brilliant detective, mystery solved. But what if the detective went missing? Who would solve them? So a secret communique from the French government has been stolen, and Holmes has been engaged to find the thief to prevent the message from falling into the wrong hands, but he's nowhere to be found, and Dr. Watson has gone off to find him. So it's up to Mrs. Hudson to investigate. So with the help of Mary Watson, Mrs. Hudson proves she can just be as canny as the great detective. I mean, what can't a woman do if she puts a mind to it, really? So Doyle wrote Victorian mysteries, notably Sherlock Holmes, which is often considered steampunk adjacent. So what is steampunk adjacent? So some of you might have heard the term steampunk adjacent. Let's first of all remind ourselves what steampunk is. So the term steampunk was first coined in 1987 by K.W. Jeter. It was used to describe the genre of speculative fiction with steam-driven and steam-driven technology, and also used to describe, more recently, an artistic and cultural movement. So there's steampunk communities, there's books, there's movies, there's events like this one. I actually know people who wear steampunk outfits every day, or steampunk inspired outfits every day. There's art, there's just music, just about everything. It's a name given to the genre of fantasy or alternative historical stories, usually set in the 19th century, or alternative future, which is reminiscent of the 19th century. And when you go into bookshops, it has a science fiction element, is what they put under science fiction usually, or sometimes you'll find it under fantasy. It depends on what they put into it. It can go both ways. So you can just go the science and gadgets, or you can go fairies and magic and stuff like that. It usually contains modern technology which is powered by steam, so it has a different feel and look to modern day, our technology we have now. And the amount of steam and gadgetry is variable. Sometimes it'll have supernatural themes. So what I'd like to think of as retrofuturism with a Victorian science fiction twist. So steampunk adjacent, well, if you Google it, there's no actual term for steampunk adjacent. It's a thing that's sort of turned up along the way, and it's often used to describe anything with a connection, even if it's tenuous, to steampunk, like Sherlock Holmes. There's novels, so you've got Victorian science fiction, which was science fiction written in Victorian times. There's Victorian fantasy or mysteries with Gadget or Steam. And sometimes it's usually something that is set in 19th century industrial age with the modern take or has that feel. So steampunk adjacent is very much about the feel of something. It's something that sparks the feel of steampunk, often with that science fiction or fantasy element. As I said, like Sherlock Holmes, which is what we're talking about. Mrs. Hudson. Okay. Did I miss a slide? Oh, I didn't. There we go. Yay. Okay, so Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, as you know, wrote Sherlock Holmes, but he also wrote fantasy and books on spirituality, which brings us to the next book I am discussing today, which is A Fairy Tale. Ta-da! So, A Fairy Tale was published end of last year, since the last steampunk event that was happening, so it's new to this steampunk event. And it's the second book in the Auntie the Mysteries, and it's a cosy-ish mystery with a fantasy twist. And it's set in 1920 Adelaide, when Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, author of Sherlock Holmes, visited Adelaide for a lecture tour on spirituality. So I'll go back to that one. Yay! He was a believer in fairies as well. So I don't know if you know about the whole turn of the century. They had this whole thing where these photos had been taken and they were supposed to be real fairies, and then many years later the girls came out and said that they'd faked it. And a lot of people actually believed in it then. Oops. So I spoke in detail about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's visit at a past steampunk event in 2020, and that was celebrating the 100th anniversary of Conan Doyle's visit to Adelaide. And if you want to view it, you can come and get that later, but the talk I did on that is actually up on my YouTube channel, so you can go and watch that if you actually really want to. Okay, right, I should go back to that one. Yeah, this one. So, Victorian Spiritualism movement was a thing that happened through Europe and America during the 1850s and was a common belief in Victorian society by 1860s. And now I'm lost to check which. I didn't number the slides. I know I did number the slides. How about that? That's pretty cool. Things you do at like midnight. Victorians had a fascination with spiritualism, ancient Egypt, fantasy, and those are some tropes that I've actually explored in the Adventures of Viola Stewart. So the first one, our second book, I Beholder, is about mummies and curses and things like that. And the third one I'm going to talk about in a minute. And the first one has Dr. Jack, which is Jack the Ripper. So it's different again, but exploring different tropes from the Victorian times. Okay. So that's the world that inspired the crossover between historical Adelaide and the Fey realm, with the return of Great Aunt Enid in Book 1. We learn the origin of a couple of the characters, so their origin story, why Aunt Enid doesn't drive, and there's a few other things, but they're spoilers, so you know if you want to know, you need to do that one there. Okay, next one. So Victorians loved a good ghost story. So, I didn't bring the other books in, that's okay. I actually had all these other books to show you. So from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein to Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol and Bram Stoker's Dracula, which I had all those books to show you, and even fantasies such as Alice in Wonderland. So it wasn't quite a ghost story, but all that fantasy stuff was there. So that's one of the things that the Victorians were into, was all that sort of stuff. But they also loved the gadgets. Oops, I just realised. Just turn something off. No, I didn't do it. Okay, so yeah, they love their gadgets, and now I've lost my space. There. So as the Victorian age wrestled with the family world, the familiar world to them of myth, legend, and fae, it also faced an unprecedented explosion in discovery and scientific inventions, and challenges to their current thinking. So there was a discovery of dinosaur fossils, and there was Darwin's on the origin of the species, and lots of other things as well. Victorian society hovered on the edge of a cliff, teetering between the old world of superstition and the new world of the age of science, held on by a lot of curiosity, a very curious lot. So perhaps that might have renewed their fascination with the spirituality, maybe as a rebellion against the growing avalanche of discoveries in science, which is sort of another thing's happening sort of now. So that's a possibility. Okay, there was a massive lot of scientific discoveries in the 19th century. It was huge, and this is just some of them. So, and this is where Anne goes, look at the list, so she doesn't have to spell everything out. Okay. So, notably the steam train, internal combustion engines. I mean, that's steampunk. I mean, we wouldn't be here without that. So that's what it's based on. Then in 1800, you had the electric battery. A lot of people don't realise it was that early. 1816, photography, so you could document family photos. Before that, only the rich could actually have family members painted. So now it was accessible to middle classes, and they could have photos done. Often there's a thing called memento mori. Some people, modern day people, freak out about this, but they'd actually, when people died, they'd lay them out in the front room for a while, and there was actually photographers that would go around and they would take photos of the people after they died, and they actually, you probably see them, you've seen probably pictures of them, and they try to make them look very lifelike, because sometimes that's the only photo they'd ever have of a loved one. So they had a very different view on stuff, and that goes back to their spirituality and superstition and stuff as well. 1817 was the first bicycle, the velocipedes or swift walkers. They were the ones that didn't actually have pedals, they just would run along like a hobby horse type thing. And then you've got the safety bicycle in 1885. And that actually allowed the middle class to travel more. And it was very enthusiastically taken up by women, and it allowed them to travel more by themselves, more often, further, and it actually really helped aid to their doing these things themselves, because otherwise they had to wait for the carriage and all sorts of stuff like that. And actually an effect on some fashion too. Women started wearing bloomers and pants and stuff like that. Oh, that was apparently quite scandalous. So in 1836 we had a telegram, and in 1876 we had a telephone, which a lot of people think, oh, it's just 20th century, but no, it was actually in early. And that allowed for communication on longer distances and a lot quicker. So you didn't have to wait for the person to go and deliver the letter, or the person to go on the horse or whatever. You could just get there like that. In 1846 we had the sewing machine, and that shortened times on manufacture, and it was easier for women in their own home to make their own clothes, because they often would make their own clothes if they couldn't afford to go to a shop, which was starting to become a thing. So that gave you more free time. 1853 was the elevator or lift, depending where you come from. Typewriter in 1867, also antiseptic, was actually a book written in that time, so back in 1867. Before that, they didn't even wash their hands, so people nodding, so you know how they had lots of deaths, and just by washing their hands, they cut down deaths, and especially deaths after surgery, by a lot. And Ben's automobile was 1886, and that is mentioned. Viola really likes her motor car that gets bought for her. Penny farthing, the light bulb, 1879, and electricity was actually starting to come in homes in 1882. And that early. And it actually increased time that you could do things. So they didn't have to stop and do things by the candle. They could actually have electricity, and there was gas before that. So it increased the length of time they could do things over the day. Done a safety bicycle in 1895, the magic lantern and moving pictures. That was by French brothers, Lumiere brothers. So probably Lumiere is French for light. And that increased and brought in new entertainment and illusion. And in 1897, Astronome. I'll get back to that one later. Okay. So scientific advances influenced the growing genre of Victorian science fiction as well. And I did have the books to show you, and I didn't bring them in, with books like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, War of the Worlds, and The Time Machine. Now, before that, they had time travel stories, and I actually did a talk on that one as well. I don't think I got the link on that one. No, I haven't. I did talk on that one in the past as well. So before that, those time travel stories were based on fae and magic and the supernatural. But now, with Time Machine and a few others actually, they were based in the realms of science, because that's that change in the thinking. And as inventions decreased manufacture time and increased usable time in the day, then leisure time of the middle classes increased as well. So then they took advantage of the fact that they had train travel and they could escape the city and go out to the countryside and have picnics, and they actually used to go and have picnics and visit their relatives in the graveyards and stuff, which we think is weird, but I think it's pretty cool. So there's more leisure time, fed the Victorians' hunger for new forms of entertainment, because they really loved entertainment. And that is also a distraction from the everyday life, which, to be honest, did leave a lot to be desired for a lot of people. Okay, now, after all that, we finally get to the theme of the event, which is Carnival. Yay! And I actually love this theme. I'll explain why later. So previous to movie houses, and there was a lot of entertainments, like they had the burlesques and stuff like that, but they had Carnival, circus and fairs were also very popular. Okay, now, there's a difference between circus and Carnival. Okay? So first of all, there's a circus, and that's I don't know if you can read that. It's a travelling company of professional entertainers, jugglers, acrobats, stuntmen and clowns, and others. And it's usually performed with the audience and performers in one place. Usually these days it's a tent, and it usually has scheduled tour dates. So it's not usually regular. So in modern days, circuses become a little bit, they come past every year or whatever, but they would sort of say, we're coming at this time. With Carnival, the festival is usually a festival to celebrate either religious, historical or cultural event, cultural figures, stuff like that.
Battery pack needs to be changed.
Oh,
I'll take over on here.
can you grab that? Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Oops. Okay. Where's up to? Yeah, so it's usually to do with celebrating a specific thing. It can be an institution, it's usually seasonal or religious festivals with a theme. It can be to a theme to a season or to an artistic event endeavour, particularly these days. It's usually outdoor with simultaneous spaces, so it has mini shows and amusement rides and stalls and food and entertainment and stuff, often in an outdoor area, a walkway or an oval, and they're like different stalls and you'll go around. It involves games, parades, street parties, entertainment, food, individual stalls and some elements of circus. It's a lot of stuff, plus more, and it usually has a fixed date celebration. So for example, Carnival, you've probably heard of Venice Carnival. And yeah, hang on, I'm getting ahead of myself. It can be traced back to Masked Theatre, Commedia dell'arte, Venice Carnival and Catholic Festival season as well. And many involve wearing masks. And it was seen as an increasing sense of community because you're all together wearing masks, and it also allowed for individuals to let loose because they were anonymous, a bit like the internet, or modern day cosplayers. Where often, I don't know about you, but I put on a steampunk outfit or a cosplay and I'm a lot more outgoing than if I'm just in my normal clothes and my anxiety takes over, which is doing now. And it often involves an excess of food or alcohol. Originally, like the Venice Carnival, yeah, we'll get into that one in a second, it was basically a big knees up before Lent. Fasting over Lent, so they're using up all the food and stuff like that. That's what that was about. And Mardi Gras is another one. It happens regularly. That's Fat Tuesday, I think, isn't it? Okay, right. So Carnival. No, Circus first. Oh, there's a typo. Look at that. That's what happens when you do it at midnight. Okay. The origins were in ancient Rome. There were stage battles, gladiators, trained animals. You probably think of the Colosseum. There were several circuses, Circus Maximus and different ones. The modern circus appeared in 18th century. In 1768, would you believe, Philip Astley, I think there's Astley Circus still around him, was possibly the first purpose-built amphitheatre, and they were doing like horse tricks and stuff like that, and it was in a circle, and then circle eventually became circus. I've got a whole list of other ones there, but it started a bit late, so that's okay. In 1782, they exported the circus to France, and it toured Europe, And in 1793, John Bill Ricketts actually took the circus to America. So we finally get to America, and then they had a few different ones go through there. The first to house the circus in a large tent rather than a purpose-built amphitheatre or hall was in 1825, that late. And probably one of the largest, probably best known travelling circuses, for good or for bad, was the Barnum and Bailey's Greatest Show on Earth. And actually, it didn't go for long, 1897 to 1902. So you'd think it'd go a lot longer than that, but it didn't. And of course, there's contemporary circuses, started really in the 1970s in Canada, Australia, France, west coast of the US and UK. There was sort of a big thing happening then. And you've probably heard of Circus Oz, which was 1978, and Circus du Soleil, which I thought, 1984, I didn't even know it was that early that it began. So Carnival can be traced, I've done that one, haven't I? Have I got that slide in twice? No. Okay, so it can trace back to Mars Theatre. I've done that one, I've repeated myself stuff. I've just repeated what I said before, that's all. So as I said, think Venice Carnival or Mardi Gras. And the first recorded modern New Orleans parade was 1837, believe it or not. So, but Venice Carnival is from the 15th century, and that was originally before Lent. So Victorians really did love being entertained. That's number 19. Oh, good. It was really funny. In 1892, Butterick Patterns actually published a book on masquerade and carnival customs and costumes. Good, go reckon. If you go on the strange machine that has books on the ether, you can actually find these weird costumes that the Victorians used to have. My favourite's the bat. If you go looking, it's pretty. I didn't get a picture of that. Okay, slide 19 is that one. Okay, so the 19th century Carnival involved the sideshows, the funfair, menageries, freak shows, unfortunately, waxworks, boxing and wrestling challenges, theatrical shows, and magicians and illusionists. I told you it's very circuitous. And eventually, illusionists became an entertainment show in themselves, using sleight of hand and science and engineering to create illusions and escapes. It's actually quite scientific. The main types of entertainment to do with illusion and magicians were, first we had the mentalists or mesmerists. They were the ones that they sort of said they had paranormal powers and they could mind read and they could levitate, that sort of thing. Also did a bit of hypnotism as well. Then you got the illusionists, did grander tricks. I think it was Houdini, actually made an elephant disappear. It's all done with mirrors. Shh, I'm not supposed to tell. And then magicians, the illusionists would admit that this is an illusion, we are tricking you. And it's even fun watching them because you think, how the hell did they do that? Even when you know how they did that, it's like, this is just so cool. And then magicians were technically on a smaller scale, and they didn't always admit that they were illusions. Some of them actually did make out that they were doing the real thing. So some of you, I just thought, let's put this still hanging on him. Some of you may be familiar with Prestige, the movie. Yep. It's actually based on a book, which I actually had to bring in to show you too, but it's sitting at the table still. And it brought to us the pledge, the turn, and the prestige or the payoff, and they have the three things in illusionists as well. Magicians use the same thing as all the same. They say they're going to do something, they set it up, and then they give you the thing, and then often they'll flip it back, so they might make a dove disappear and they have to make it come back, so different things like that. So the gadget, it had a lot of gadgets and scientific stuff in there, but also had the fantastical, and it's a good way to describe steampunk adjacent, because it's not technically steampunk, but you've got all those gadgets and stuff, and plus David Bowie. Okay, so illusion, the history of illusion, yes. So illusionists, and I'll talk about this one because I actually have the book. I was going to say that. I should mention the book, shouldn't I? The Illusioneer is based on that one, and it's all about, I think I'm going to talk about that later. Anyway, yes. Illusion and magic can be traced back to 2700 BC, but you don't say BC anymore, I forget what you say now, in ancient Egypt. So they were producing balls out of thin air. Still quite spectacular how they can do that sleight of hand. In the turn of the century, there was Bosco with tin cups and plasterboards. There's hand performers. Now, there was a guy, like the Indian basket, the talking head and the Sphinx. Some people may have heard of those. No, or not. There were people who used hand movements or just observing. They pretend they read your mind. Some performed in purpose-built halls. Generally, illusionists themselves tend to do things in halls. There was one guy, Agatston, and I haven't got the date for him, it was mid to 1800s, I think, travelled in a floating palace, which was a ship that he turned into a magic drawing room, and he was noted for his ghost shows, so that brings back the Victorians' love for magic, entertainment and ghosts. So there you go, and it's quite popular. There's one called Magic Inkstand, which we look at it and go, look, but yeah, it's a pen that can write in your desired colour. These days I've just got those clip pens, it's pretty cool. And he actually used modern apparatus worked by electricity and mechanisms. So the science really kicked off the illusionist stuff. There was actually some famous female illusionists as well, Miss Anne Eva Fay and Madame Cora. And of course we know about Houdini, Harry Houdini and David Copperfield and Penn and Teller. So one of the most dangerous ones was catching a bullet in your teeth. It actually has cost lives. In 1918, Chi Ling Su died on stage in London, and the coroner's verdict with most of these ones are usually death by adventure, misadventure. For a while, in the 70s I think it was, it came back, but again, it wasn't safe, it's really not safe. And they would get them to sign things beforehand. The illusionists would sign a thing saying if they died, it wasn't the person who shot the bullet's fault. But you could also catch them in an apple and a handkerchief, and even on the point of a sword apparently. But it's a sleight of hand thing, but it can go terribly, terribly wrong actually. So there's so many things that can go wrong. Okay, right. They actually had illusionist handbooks. So there's a magician's own book, Practical Magician and Ventriloquist's Guide. There was a 19th century Spanish manual as well. One on the power of numbers, which was actually written by a Franciscan monk, which is pretty cool. And in 1897, you can get a copy of this one on the internet, in the ether. I've actually got a copy. It's really cool. But then again, I'm a bit of a science freak, so oops. And it's called Magic Stage Illusions and Scientific Diversions, including Trick Photography. Big mouthful. And this is just some of the examples, if you can see those. And one of them actually has all the angles and everything drawn out and some different ideas. And you've probably heard of the talking robot, looks like a Turkish guy. Yeah, I've forgotten the name of it now. I can't quite read that. But yeah, so it was a big thing, it was huge. Okay, which brings me to the Illusioneer. So I'm finally going back to steampunk adjacent. So there is some steampunk stuff in here. So over the years, steampunk has slowly encompassed and absorbed many tropes. Carnival is just another one of these, and so is Illusionists and stuff like that. In my book, The Illusioneer, our heroine Viola travels to Venice and she gets caught up in Carnival, it's well like this, and crosses paths with mysterious and nefarious illusionists as well. So the illusionists and that. So I said it was very circular. And that ends, no, I had something else to say. I didn't write it down. What was it? I'm looking at Anne, she's going, don't look at me. Oh yeah, another reason I love Carnival and that sort of stuff is if it wasn't for the circus, my mum would not have met my dad and I wouldn't be here. And things you don't find out from your parents, it was like I was in my 50s before I found out from my mum that my dad was part of a Canadian circus that came to Australia and to Queensland, and that was like 65, so that's the beginning of the modern circus I was talking about in Canada and Australia and that. And I'm reading this and going, oh my God! So if it wasn't for that, he was working for the circus, came over here, had me and stayed. And it's a lot more complicated than that, but that's pretty cool. So I actually have a bit of when it was Carnival, I'm going, yay! So that's sad, I know. So this does bring me to the end of the talk. So at the moment, if you're interested in the Dr. Jack, I've got a book bundle 3:30, and you get some badges and crocheted stuff by me and stuff like that. And the other books are there. If you like ebooks and you want to get the novelette of Mrs. Hudson Investigates, if you buy it, there's a link. If you buy it this weekend and show me that you bought it, I've got some bookmarks for that too. So basically, thank you for sharing your time with me. My links are, ooh, what the hell happened there? My links are on the screen. I have a table near the first aid. We're having a good talk with the first aid people, it's really good. And as I said, I've got a limited number of specials and stuff like that. So thank you. That was on theme, wasn't it? Yeah.
Very fascinating.
Yeah, well, you know me, I always do the history stuff. I do all this research while I'm doing books, so I've got to do talks about the research.
I wanted to ask you, you've done an amazing amount of research to put into all your books. How on earth when did you start doing the research, and how did you go about it? Because you're giving us information that we haven't had any access to. Even in my own time, there's a lot of things you're telling me, I think, oh, I should have known that, and I didn't know. How do
I do that?
research for each book that you read?
Well, I usually get an idea for the book, and then I'll go, okay, I'm doing this series, and I'm going to use Victorian tropes. So what are the Victorian tropes? Well, Illusionists were big, and Carnival and stuff like that. Dr. Jack was a huge thing, so that's why that's the first one, because everyone likes Jack the Ripper. Well, not you know what I mean, is fascinated by Jack the Ripper. And then, of course, I love ancient Egypt, and I was actually watching some documentary. A lot of time I'm watching a documentary and I go, ooh.
What, just on television?
Television, sometimes it's something someone says, and I go, yeah. Well, what I do then is I go and research. Now, if you go to Wikipedia, don't look at Wikipedia, look at the references down the bottom, and if you go and check those out, that's how I found this book here. And there's a lot of places, libraries and a lot of museums and stuff that have scanned stuff and put them online. I've got so many books that have been scanned, old books on my computer. It's like, I'll never read them all. So I sometimes go down rabbit holes, and then I go pull myself up a couple days later and go, no, I don't actually need to know all this other stuff. I need to concentrate on this. So then you've got to go back and go, okay. So often I'm doing research in my head, like just reading stuff, because I've always been big into documentaries. I did science, my Bachelor of Applied Science, so I've always been a bit of a science person. I love history, so that's part of it. And I'll know little bits, like like a lot of people, I watch a lot of the Jack the Ripper documentaries. And I was actually reading one, watching one, and the song Behind Blue Eyes by The Who came on. And that's, you know, from the bad guy's point of view. So I thought, oh, I will write one from the bad guy's point of view. He thinks he's doing the right thing, because one thing we learnt is the bad guys always think they're doing the right thing. They think they're the good guys. And so I started watching more, and I had all of that stuff anyway, and a friend of mine is a ripperologist, so I ran things past her. Now, I did a bit of research for that, started reading the book, and then things popped into the book, and I couldn't figure out why they popped in the book. So then when I finished the first draft, I then go and look at, okay, I've had an idea for this, this, and this. I need to now go and research that. And I couldn't figure out why, for the life of me, I put Inspector Abeline with, behind him he's got a whole clockwork stuff, and I used that because steampunk, and it was a way for the main character to bond with this other character, because, you know, she was female, to bond together. And I don't know why I put them in there, and then later, and then going back and doing research later, so internet, library, talk to people. I know people who are really obscure professors. I know the most cool, weird people. I met a guy at an event who actually was down in South Australia, in Adelaide, for a mortuary, my brain, he embalms people for a living. Yeah, so he's a mortician, thank you, I'm tired. For a mortician's conference. And he was at he just started talking. as you know, I can chat to people till my leg falls off, or your leg falls off. So I like picking people's brains. So I was asking him this thing, and he was down doing a talk because he was a specialist in ancient Egyptian embalming. So I said, do you mind in a couple of years' time when I'm writing a book about that, because it's one of my things on my list, if I contact you? And he said, no, that's fine. So I have his email address. So when I'm talking to people, people are really interesting. Their jobs are really interesting. The poor guys that come to our house, electrician, I'm always asking them questions. And I'm going, oh, I'm a writer. Can you do this, 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 and this? Oh, yeah, you can do that. And the plumber, and everyone that comes to our house. I'm lying in hospital, or they're doing an ECG on me, and I'm going, oh, this, and this. And they go, huh? And I go, I'm a writer. And they go, oh, and they tell you stuff. So talking to people, books, internet. I was talking about something and I started off on a tangent, didn't I? I was talking, oh yeah, so I go back to doing the research for Dr. Jack one, and I was doing some more research into Inspector Aberline, depending on how you say it, and it turns out he was a clockmaker before he was a policeman. And I hadn't actually remembered at the time that I was writing it, but when I read it, I went, oh yeah, that's right, I think I read that years ago. So things stick in the back of your head, or they do in mine, and they just come out at weird times. So I asked Dave, I'm always, oh, there's a documentary on that sounds interesting. Oh, there's a talk on this. We went to a talk in town at the library, was it the library in town? Then they were doing it on the Memento Mori, the photograph, the deputy and Victorian photography, and I was sitting there going, oh, and asking questions, and this lady behind me going, oh my god, ooh, yuck. And it's like, really, yeah, I think it's the scientist in me, I love learning stuff.
It's just that you spend so much of your life doing it that I don't know how you find time to actually sit down.
Oh, that's sometimes an issue. Yeah, you go down a rabbit hole and you go, I can't go down this rabbit hole any further even though I want to. I've got to do some work.
Can you do just one more for me?
Yeah, that's okay.
Carnival, is it something like our spring shows with all the side
they are technically a carnival. If you think about Venice Carnival or Mardi Gras as well. Yeah, basically the Adelaide show is like a carnival. It's not a circus. It's like a, yes, what is it? What was their tagline this year? Come back home or something? It's like coming home, the greatest reunion or something. I thought that was a really good one actually. Yeah, the showback. Yeah, they were actually plugging it as the greatest reunion or something like that. And I thought that's really cool because a lot of people do go to the show to meet other people and stuff like that. So yeah, but yeah, I can talk. You asked me about books and research. I can talk forever.
Yes, we realise that. But you've got two lives. You've got all this research that you can pass on to people like me. Have you actually had time to put it down in print?
That's because I don't work full time anymore. I don't work a paid job anymore, so I've got time to do it all. But yes.
Well, you're not doing your own editing, you know?
Well, no, she does my editing.
But you do that through Canada.
Yeah, but no, it's too easy to get down a rabbit hole, and 1 week later I'll go, I've written lots of notes, but I haven't actually written anything, and it's not actually useful for this one, but it turns up being useful somewhere.
Thank you, Karen.
You're welcome. Thank you very much. Finish.